Hi, I'm Linda McLaughlin-Feigl, co-owner of Pages, a bookstore in Manhattan Beach, California, and I am thrilled to be sitting here with Ed Tarkington, the author of the Indies introduced breakout novel, Only Love Can Break Your Heart. And, well, maybe we should start with just the title of the book. Obviously,
Sure.
those of us who know Neil Young recognize the reference.
Right, absolutely. Well, when I started writing this story, I was kind of, going back into, it was kind of drawing on childhood memories and trying to construct these characters and images out of the things that I did remember. And I was very young in the 70s, so I don't remember very much of it. But what sort of I did remember was the music that I was listening to. My half-sister, who is kind of an inspiration for a lot of what I'm writing about here, turned me on to rock music when I was very young and gave me my first rock records, which were the Doobie Brothers' Greatest Hits, which my mother hated because I'd go around the house, singing Doobie 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 like I didn't know what it was, and then Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young's So Far, which was their Greatest Hits compilation, and I would listen to Helpless by Neil Young over and over again. I would just put it on my little turntable in my room and just kind of sit there staring at it and listening to those sounds, which just struck me as being at once both ancient and otherworldly. Like he just sounded like he was from outer space, and the imagery and the lyrics was so compelling to me. Blue windows behind the stars. I'm 5 or 6 years old, thinking about this. Yellow moon on the rise, big birds flying across the sky, and that one always stood out to me because when I was 5 years old, I actually visualized Big Bird from Sesame Street flying across the sky when I would listen to the song, and it kept this kind of haunting image in my mind. To this present day, I still have that same record. I listened to it with my kids the other day. And so I wanted to kind of, try to draw on that memory and that feeling that the music provided when I was writing the story. Now, later on, I was struggling to come up with what I was going to title the novel, and I was driving around in my truck, and I was listening to, After the Gold Rush, and I really liked that song a lot, and was kind of like, gosh, it'd be cool if I could nick a little lyric from After the Gold Rush. But nothing there really works, because if you really read those lyrics, the song's kind of strange. It doesn't fit the mood of what I was trying to capture. But the next song was Only Love Can Break Your Heart. And as soon as it came on and start playing those chords and hits the chorus, I was just like, that's it. This light bulb went off over my head, and I just knew that was going to be the title of the book. And then when I listened to the lyrics, which I memorized years ago but never really thought about, I realized, gosh, this is almost kind of a synopsis of the story, right? When you were young and on your own, how did it feel to be alone? And sort of the loneliness of the characters and the longing and the gap between people who are trying to love each other but don't really know how to do it in a way that's, I guess, healthy at first. Really struck me as almost as if that had kind of crept into my subconscious. So it really kind of felt meant to be.
Kind of perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And then, since we're on music, could you talk about this
Sure.
CD and Will Hogan?
Yeah. It's actually a vinyl record. I'm so excited because for the first, I always wanted to be a rock star, and now I've got my own vinyl record, even though I don't sing on it. It's actually music by a good friend of mine, Will Hogue, who's a pretty well-known musician out in Nashville, Grammy-nominated singer-songwriter. And basically the way that came about was, when I was conferencing with Algonquin and they were asking me, sometimes we try to come up with some little something to get the booksellers' attention when we send the books out, and do you have any ideas? And just immediately I said, well, why don't we, the boys in the book just listen to their records all the time. Why don't we just print up a bunch of vinyl records and put the book cover on it and just send those out? And they were like, well, that's a great idea. And that was kind of the end of it. And I went home and I was telling my wife all about the conference, and Will's wife, Julia, was over at our house as well, and our kids were playing together in the backyard. And so I was catching them all up on what had happened, and I told them about the record idea. And my wife was like, well, what are you going to put on it? And I was like, well, I hadn't thought that through. I just sort of thought it'd be
put Neil
like
Young on it, I guess. That'd be
right.
a little expensive.
Well, yeah, exactly. That was like, I guess that would be prohibitively costly, I imagine. And then my wife was like, well, why don't you just get Will to write some songs and record them and put them on a record for you? And I was like, yeah, that's hilarious. And then Julia, his wife, was like, oh no, he would totally do that. And I was like, well, I can't ask him to do that. That's a lot to ask of somebody. And I've always kind of, I've watched how when you're a person of some stature in the music world in Nashville, people are always asking you for favors, and I didn't want to be one of those people who was, imposing on my friend and, kind of tampering with our friendship by, asking him for this huge favor. But Julia went home and told him that we had had this conversation, and she pressured me. She's like, look, he wants to do it, but you have to ask him. He's not going to volunteer. You have to ask him. And I was like, okay. So I went over to his house, and I think my exact words were, I would like to exploit your fame and talent for my benefit. And he said, happy to do it. And the songs are magnificent. And he read the book and loved it, and the idea was not to write songs that were based on the book, but that were inspired by, the characters and the situations. And so in a way, it's kind of come full circle because the book was inspired by music, and now there's this music that was inspired by the book.
That's great. Well, hearing you talk about music, you clearly have nostalgia for a period
Sure.
that you said you remember as a very young person.
Gauzily.
But I'm a little older, so I remember it more clearly, perhaps. But when I read it, it evoked lots of nostalgia in me, and it certainly seems that Rocky, as the author, has nostalgia for that period.
Sure.
But it strikes me that his growing up was not without some traumatic events and some real heartaches, but he's not bitter at all. His nostalgia is optimistic and affectionate. Is your view of the past similar to his? Or?
Yes and no. I mean, I think that, Rocky's probably a little bit more, I think what changed for me, I would say I didn't used to be that way, and now I am. And I think the reason why is because I have children of my own now. And so before I had children, when I looked back on the traumatic events of the past or the things that I had really struggled with, which are hugely in the subtext of this story. It's a very personal story for me, even though I tried as best as I could to write away from the facts. Those things were hard for me, and I did not look on them very fondly until I started raising my own girls, and a couple of things happened to me. I mean, probably the first thing that happened was that I suddenly had this desire for the world to be a better place than it probably is, because I just wanted to believe that the future for my kids was going to be one that would have happiness and meaning. And so the pessimism that I probably felt when I was younger had to fade away, because how can you keep going if you don't believe that things are going to get better? And of course, when you have these children in your life, all the vanity that I had before I had kids just evaporated, and I really realized that this was happiness. But the other thing that happened to me was I started thinking about what my parents, and particularly what my father, had gone through, from a parent's perspective instead of from the child's perspective, looking up at the imperfections of your parents and wondering why, questioning their decisions and not having, a ton of understanding. And now when you realize, this incredible love that you have for your own kids, which is both beautiful and terrifying, right? Because bad things are going to happen, and they're going to suffer. They're going to struggle. So, I had to re-examine those things, and so I felt much more generous, I think, to the past than I did before.
Well, one of the last things that Rocky says is, and I had it right here, about regret. I love that. I know no good can come from regrets.
Yeah.
Is your view of the past similar? Oh, yeah. I mean, that's good. So when I read it too, I kind of had a crush on Paul. I'm guessing you probably had a crush on Lee. Did they?
Sure.
Where did those characters?
I probably
come
have
from?
a crush on Paul too.
Yeah.
I think that Paul was kind of, he's my idea of the guy that you want to be, and yet at the end, you discover that he's very flawed, but he's also very vulnerable, and so I wanted to create a character that was honest to the truth about how people really are. You think they're cool and impenetrable, but in reality, they're just as doubtful and weak as anybody else. And then Lee is definitely a kind of projection of a number of different women I've known in my life who I think embody a kind of tragic beauty, and I really wanted to pay tribute to that.
I think you did an excellent job.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
And this debut novel, it's pretty exciting.
It's very exciting, and I'm very grateful for the support I've gotten from the AVA. It's been amazing.
Thank you.